He began the journey with a quiet confidence that came from months of preparation and years of dreaming about this moment. As he stood at the base of the frozen mountain, everything he had imagined suddenly felt real. The air was colder than he expected, but it didn't shake his belief. In his mind, courage was the deciding factor. He believed that if he stayed brave, focused, and determined, the mountain would eventually submit to his will. This was not arrogance, but a deep personal conviction shaped by past struggles he had already survived in life. Each step forward felt like a declaration. The crunch of ice beneath his boots echoed his resolve, reinforcing the idea that he belonged there. He tightened the straps of his backpack, feeling reassured by its weight, as if it carried not just supplies but proof of his readiness. He reminded himself why he had come: to challenge his limits, to escape the noise of everyday life, and to prove that fear did not control his decisions. The mountain, towering above him, appeared less like a threat and more like an opponent waiting to be conquered. His thoughts drifted to the people who had doubted him. Friends who warned him that the cold would break him, that isolation would weaken his mind, and that nature does not respect human ambition. He acknowledged their words, but he did not accept them. To him, courage was not the absence of fear. It was the willingness to move forward despite it. And at that moment, he felt rich in courage. It filled his chest, warmed his spirit, and drowned out the small voice of caution whispering at the edge of his thoughts. As he climbed higher, the world below slowly disappeared. Familiar paths, human voices, and signs of civilization faded behind him. With every step, he felt lighter emotionally, as if he were shedding doubt, regret, and hesitation. The mountain became his entire world, and within that world, he believed his mindset was his greatest weapon. He trusted his mental strength more than his equipment, convinced that resilience would carry him through moments when the body felt weak. The cold nipped at his face, and the wind tested his balance, but he welcomed the discomfort as part of the experience. Pain, he believed, was temporary. Fear, he believed, was optional. What mattered was forward motion. He told himself that those who succeed are the ones who refuse to stop, and on this first day, stopping did not even feel like a possibility. Every step upward strengthened his belief that courage was enough, that as long as his heart remained steady and his will unbroken, the mountain would have no choice but to let him pass. At first glance, the mountain appeared calm, almost welcoming, as if it were standing still to observe him rather than confront him. The snow rested quietly on its slopes, untouched and pure, reflecting the pale light of the sky. There was no roar of wind, no sudden movement, nothing that openly threatened him. This quietness created a false sense of security, making it easy to believe that the climb would be gentle, that the warnings he had heard were exaggerated. The mountain's beauty masked its danger, and its stillness felt like permission to continue without hesitation. As he moved deeper into the climb, he began to notice subtle signs that the silence was not kindness but control. The air grew sharper, cutting against his skin with invisible edges. Each breath required more effort, as if the mountain were slowly tightening its grip around his chest. The absence of sound became heavy, pressing against his thoughts. There were no birds, no rustling trees, no signs of life, only the steady rhythm of his own footsteps and breathing, reminding him how small and alone he truly was. The cold crept in quietly, without announcement. It slipped through the smallest gaps in his clothing and settled into his fingers and toes. At first, it was easy to ignore, but gradually it demanded attention. His hands stiffened, movements becoming slower and less precise. The mountain had not attacked him directly. Instead, it tested him patiently, draining warmth and energy in a way that felt almost deliberate. It was as if the environment itself was watching, waiting to see how long his confidence would last. The wind, though gentle, carried a message. It brushed past him just enough to disturb his balance, just enough to remind him that the mountain could change its mood at any moment. Each gust felt like a warning whispered rather than shouted, a reminder that the calm could vanish without notice. He realized that this place did not need violence to assert its power. It relied on endurance, on time, and on the slow erosion of comfort and certainty. With every step, the silence grew louder in his mind. It forced him inward, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The mountain did not speak, but its message was clear: strength here would not be measured by confidence alone. Survival would depend on awareness, patience, and respect for forces far greater than human will. Though he continued climbing, a subtle shift occurred within him. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt watchful, as if the mountain were observing his every move, quietly reminding him that he was a guest in a place where nature always has the final word. As the hours passed, the first real signs of struggle began to surface, quietly but persistently. What had started as a manageable chill slowly transformed into a deep, biting cold that reached beneath his skin. His fingers, once flexible and responsive, grew stiff and clumsy, making simple tasks require focus and effort. Each time he adjusted his gear or tightened a strap, he noticed the delay between intention and movement. It was a small change, but it carried a warning the mountain was already demanding more from him than he had anticipated. The cold was no longer something he could ignore. It followed him with every step, settling into his joints and slowing his pace. His breath became shorter and more deliberate, forming pale clouds that disappeared almost as quickly as they appeared. The higher he climbed, the thinner the air felt, and his body worked harder just to maintain a steady rhythm. Fatigue crept in earlier than expected, not as exhaustion but as a constant drain that chipped away at his energy. He realized that progress here would not be measured in distance, but in how well he managed his strength. Small discomforts began to stack upon one another. His boots felt heavier, the straps on his backpack dug into his shoulders, and the incline seemed to grow steeper with each step. What once felt like a confident march now required careful planning. He had to stop more often, not because he wanted to, but because his body insisted. These pauses gave him time to notice how quiet everything was, how isolated the climb had become, and how quickly conditions could shift from tolerable to dangerous. Mentally, the struggle was just as real. His thoughts, once focused and determined, started to wander. Doubt slipped in during moments of rest, asking questions he didn't yet have answers for. How much colder would it get? How long could his body handle this strain? He pushed these thoughts aside, reminding himself that this was only the first day, that discomfort was part of the process. Still, the presence of these questions marked a change. The climb was no longer just a test of ambition, it was becoming a test of resilience. Despite the growing challenges, he continued forward. Each step became an act of discipline rather than excitement. He paid closer attention to his movements, conserving energy and adjusting his pace. The mountain had begun to reveal its true nature, not through dramatic danger, but through steady pressure. By the end of the day, he understood that survival here would depend on respecting these early warning signs. The struggle had begun, and ignoring it would only make the days ahead far more unforgiving. As daylight faded, the sense of isolation settled in more heavily than the cold itself. The sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, taking what little warmth it had offered and leaving behind a vast, shadowed landscape. The world seemed to shrink until only the mountain and his small presence within it remained. There were no voices, no distant lights, no signs that anyone else existed beyond the snow and stone surrounding him. For the first time since beginning the climb, the reality of being completely alone truly reached him. He began setting up camp with deliberate care, knowing that even minor mistakes could have serious consequences. Every movement felt slower now, not just because of fatigue, but because the silence demanded caution. The absence of sound was unsettling. In normal life, silence offered rest, but here it felt watchful, as if the mountain itself were paying attention. The thin fabric of the tent became the only barrier between him and the unforgiving cold, and as he secured it against the ground, he became painfully aware of how fragile that protection was. Once inside the tent, the isolation deepened. The space was small, barely enough to sit upright, and the walls trembled slightly with each passing breeze. His breathing sounded louder in the enclosed space, echoing his awareness of himself. With no distractions, his thoughts grew clearer and heavier. Memories surfaced uninvited, faces from home, unfinished conversations, and the comfort of places he had taken for granted. These thoughts carried warmth, but they also intensified the distance between where he was and where he came from. The sky outside transformed into a vast display of stars, cold and distant, stretching endlessly above him. It was beautiful, but the beauty came with a sense of insignificance. Looking up, he felt small in a way he never had before. The mountain was not impressed by his courage or his goals. It existed on its own terms, indifferent to his presence. That realization pressed against his chest, making him aware of how easily the mountain could erase him without effort or intention. As the temperature continued to drop, the isolation became physical as well as emotional. His body tensed against the cold, and sleep came in short, uneasy moments. In the quiet of the night, every sound, fabric shifting, wind brushing the tent, felt amplified. Alone with his thoughts, he could no longer distract himself with movement or purpose. The isolation forced him inward, stripping away confidence and leaving him face to face with his vulnerability. By the end of the night, he understood that surviving the mountain would require more than strength. It would require learning how to endure loneliness without letting it consume him. As he lay in his small tent that first night, the quiet and isolation pressed heavily against his mind. The physical challenges of the day, the biting cold, the stiffening fingers, the exhausting climb were one thing, but now the mental weight of being completely alone began to take hold. Without the distractions of conversation, city sounds, or even wildlife, his thoughts had space to expand unchecked. Doubt, the silent companion he had hoped to leave behind, crept into his consciousness. For the first time, he questioned the choices that had brought him here, the courage that had carried him this far, and whether it would be enough to see him through the days ahead. The wind howled outside, slipping through the smallest gaps in his tent, and every gust felt like a subtle reminder of his vulnerability. The mountain did not need to attack to assert dominance. It had a patience and a quiet authority that was far more intimidating. He realized that being alone on this climb meant facing not only the physical obstacles, but the relentless pressure of his own mind. His thoughts twisted around fears he hadn't acknowledged. During the daylight hours, the possibility of injury, the possibility of frostbite, the possibility that this climb could demand more than he was capable of giving. In the silence, memories of home and people he loved surfaced unbidden. Faces, voices, and moments he had once considered trivial became vivid, almost haunting. He thought of his family, of the comfort of a warm bed, of the laughter of friends. Each memory was bittersweet, providing warmth, but also highlighting the stark contrast to the cold, lonely reality he now faced. The distance between this world and the one he had left behind felt immeasurable, and it deepened the sense of isolation. He was not merely climbing a mountain, he was climbing into a space where ordinary comforts could not reach him, and that truth settled heavily on his chest. As he tried to rest, the first seeds of doubt grew more insistent. He wondered if courage alone could truly see him through, or if it was simply the illusion of strength when faced with overwhelming conditions. He questioned his preparation, his judgment, and even his reasons for undertaking this challenge. Each thought seemed magnified by the stillness around him, and he realized that the mountain demanded more than physical endurance. It demanded resilience of mind and spirit. Yet, amid this doubt, a small spark of determination remained. He reminded himself that every climber who reached a summit had faced similar fears, that every journey worth taking included moments of uncertainty and hardship. He focused on what he could control, his next steps, his ability to remain alert, and his commitment to survive. Lying there, shivering but unbroken, he understood that the mountain was already teaching him the most important lesson of all: courage was not a guarantee, but a choice he would need to make over and over again in the days to come.